afternoon, everyone, and welcome to segment number 2 of our Totara User Group session. Just wanted to say hello to everybody. Thank you so much for attending. And really just wanted to get started here with Joe Cheeseman and Lewis John. We have both of them here today, and they're going to be talking us through a couple of case study examples from some of our key clients here. So we have BMI Healthcare going to be showcasing their compliance portal and talking through their learner journeys. And we also have Lewis John here, who's going to be talking about MindEd, which is actually available online. It's a fully public LMS, and they've very, very perceptively used learner personas to help create a really impressive learner journey. So we're going to first start off with Joe Cheeseman. So I'll just be handing over to Joe, and we'll get started. So Joe, hello and good afternoon.
Hi Ash, can you hear me there okay?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, I've got a really bad echo on here, everybody, so
Sorry, Joe, I think you just need to mute your speakers
okay.
there.
So hopefully that sounds a bit better.
Yeah.
Okay, so just before I get going into talking to you about BMI, I'd just like to find out if anybody's currently using their LMS, if they have one implemented for any kind of compliance purposes. Okay, so it looks like we've got a few people in the session anyway who are using it for compliance. So just skip on to the next question, was that if you are using your LMS for compliance, what sort of barriers or challenges have you come across in either your implementation or getting people to use it and so on? If you just want to note a few of those into the chat panel, that would be really helpful. Just trying to get a gauge of whether you're facing similar issues as our client BMI have had.
Looks like we have a shy bunch here today, Joe.
Okay, I can't say anything there. So it doesn't look like there's too many people willing to share their experiences here. So that's okay. Let's just move on, and I'll talk you through what we found with BMI in our journey. So just giving you a little a look there at what their website looks like. BMI actually were one of the very first organisations to adopt Totara when it was first released. So I think they got something like version 1.1 of Totara. So that was quite a long time ago. And just a little background on this sort of talk. They are BMI Healthcare. I don't know if you've heard of them before, but they are the largest private hospital group in the UK. They implemented an LMS specifically to help them deliver their mandatory training, which is absolutely essential for them to become compliant with their regulatory body, which is the Care Quality Commission. In terms of the people that they're targeting, it was all their employees, and as well as what they call bank employees. Those are temporary employees such as nurses who may only work with them for a few months or so, and these people tend to maybe come work with them for a few months and then go work somewhere else and then come back again. So they're kind of in and out in terms of whether they're employees or not. And the content's very specifically compliance-based learning, although the site is now used for other purposes as well. But that was the initial brief or objective that BMI had. So just a few facts and figures about BMI. As I said, they're the largest private hospital group in the UK. They have 66 hospitals and treatment centres located across the breadth of the UK, and they have quite a large number of different specialities and services that they offer. They have just under 9,000 permanent employees working for BMI, and then it's around about 5,000 bank or temporary staff. And they have 2 million patients visiting them every single year. So quite a large and very busy organisation. So just in terms of sort of background as to why they needed their LMS, they are subject to extremely rigorous statutory training requirements, which are set by the CQC. And this is all focused on keeping their patients safe. It's absolutely business critical because CQC actually have the power to shut hospitals down if they're not compliant. For instance, to meet their standards, all their hospitals have to prove that they're 85% compliant for mandatory training, and for all staff that's been in the business for more than 3 months, so that's whether they're a direct employee or a bank staff, they must prove that they are 85% compliant. So this is not just a nice to have for BMI by any stretch of the imagination, it's absolutely critical to them. So what they need to do is they need to assign relevant and appropriate mandatory completing the right training at the right time. So sounds easy, yeah? Not at all. Their starting point was very complicated. They're a large, complex organisation. They have an eclectic range of users, majority of whom are not actually desk-based because they're clinical staff working in the hospital. They have a wide range of job roles and responsibilities, which means actually different employees, people need to complete different types of mandatory training. So a sheep-dip approach of making everybody complete all the mandatory training isn't going to work. They're also, as I mentioned, they're multi-sited, so that actually makes the administration of the system quite complex. What they have is a learning coordinator at each site, and each of those people need to have their training on the system, and it's also the role of that learning coordinator to encourage people to go on the system, to champion it. What they had in the past was inconsistency across these sites in terms of maintaining their training records. So lots of different approaches, lots of gaps in the data. They've got legacy inefficient systems with inconsistencies in course assignment and tracking learning performance. Audit reports that were previously manually compiled, so all paper-based and in different formats. And a backdrop to that was a very big reluctance or resistance to actually any kind of change. And also, very significantly, the senior leadership team were not compliant themselves in terms of the training, so were not actually cascading a good example or role model down through to the organisation. So quite a challenging environment and situation for BMI to set out on their journey, which actually was about 3.5 years ago now. So their objectives were to meet the absolutely critical for them to meet the CQC Commission standards, to meet their legal statutory requirements, and to ensure the consistent staff development. So they decided that a technology approach had to be the answer, and that was going to enable them to create targeted and what they call personalised training, which would also allow them to pull out efficient and accurate reports. They decided that Totara was the solution for them, and I think it's quite interesting to look at why they chose Totara for their solution. They really were keen on the idea of it being open source, and felt that sort of philosophy matched their own values. If you take some time to actually look at their website, you'll see that they do give a lot back to community, and they support local charities and so on. So they're really keen on that. And actually, BMI have been very keen to adopt a partnership approach with Totara. And it's been quite an interesting journey, I think, between BMI and Totara, because they have really helped to shape some of the new features, such as certifications and performance management, which they actually partly funded, as well as reporting and online help and resources. So they were very keen to share the experiences that they were having back into the Totara community and back to Totara itself that they could help shape the development roadmap going forward. And that was something that they were very keen on from the outset, so that I suppose ultimately they would get a system that would work for them. So in terms of their journey, I think there's sort of 4 work streams that they've had to focus their time and energy on. So that culture change piece that we talked about, with people being resistant to actually change. And then in terms of the system itself, the standardisation, what training needs to happen and when, and target training or personalisation in terms of who needs to do what, and then the reporting. So just have a look at each of those work streams in turn. First of all, their target audience, as I said, many of their people are not desk-based. They're clinical staff, so they're nurses or porters working within the hospital. Actually getting them to sit down at a PC and in the first place and do the e-learning is quite a challenge, let alone sort of getting them into a learning management system. Many people don't have much experience working on a PC, so they've got quite low confidence levels and quite low IT skills. So it was very important to make the system extremely simple, quite intuitive to use, not lots of navigational layers in order for them to get to the key learning. There wasn't really a huge amount of motivation for people to change their ways, so they had to really work hard at encouraging and supporting people, making sure the key messages were coming down from the top so that people really understood why this was important for the business and for them as individuals. And in terms of the administrators, there was definitely a huge lack of trust in the existing data of the administrators of the system. So it was key to sort of build their trust and make sure that they believed in the new system. So how did they tackle this? It was very much a sort of campaign-based approach, with using a number of different channels to reach out to people. So they had regular messaging about the system, BMI Learning, how to access it, who they could go to get support, what they need to do in terms of completions, how many other hospitals were getting on, how compliant were they, and so on. And this was through a variety of different sort of more traditional posters and memos and so on, but also electronic emails and newsletters and monthly communications, messages through team meetings and so on. In terms of getting the learning coordinators on board, there were regular webinars and face-to-face training, so there was a sort of roadshow around all the hospitals to train all of those up. They did pick out any hospitals that had existing low levels of compliance. So any hospitals that were under 40% in terms of compliance, they actually picked them out and gave them additional consultancy. And they ran competitions, sort of, who could become compliant the quickest and who had recently become compliant. So really sort of trying to incentivise people to do their training. And what was also key was getting the senior leadership team on board, and so there was a whole sort of campaign of activities around this, head of department meetings, one-to-ones with senior leaders, coaching and so on. And what they found actually is quite interesting, that those directors or executive directors of hospitals that weren't really on board, it really reflected in their figures in terms of whether they were compliant or not. Anyway, with all this activity, relentless activity, they achieved really great results and have had huge engagement. Everybody knows about the site, how to access it, how to complete their training, and why it's important to them. And what's more, the feedback is that they really, really like it. So it makes their life easier. They're not having to do training that they don't need to do, and they get reminders and so on about when they need to do training. So that part of it was really good. I think it's also important to say that it's continued. It's not just that campaign's not over. They have to keep going with it all the time. It's something that they can't just drop and leave. They need to keep putting time and effort into it. So in terms of the actual system itself and setting that up, The first step was what they call standardisation. What they needed to do was, first of all, they obviously wanted to get all their learning onto the site, whether it was face-to-face training or whether it was e-learning. And what they did as a first step was create what they call a mandatory training matrix to really kind of get their data or their house in order. So that identified what programs were mandatory, and within those programs what courses were mandatory, how often they had to be completed, because not all programs had to be completed every year, some of them were every 2 years, what methods of delivery they had for those, and who were the target audience. So in the past, the way it worked was that everybody did everything every 12 months, and clearly that was very much a sheep dip approach, which I guess, apart from anything, was people doing training that's not relevant to the role was, a real turn-off. But also a huge waste of time for them as well. So this was very much about making sure that they were going to be able to personalise the training to the role and responsibility and also their environment. So if they're going to work in a situation where there's hazardous waste, then they need to be able to know how to deal with that. If they don't, then clearly they don't need to. So this made sure that it was going to cover the right training for all 15,000 people. Part of that also was putting together something they called a personal profile questionnaire. So when people first logged onto the system, they would have to complete this questionnaire. I've got a snapshot of it here. And there's a whole variety of questions like, is your role clinical? Do you regularly use display screen equipment? And so on. By completing this, it meant that they would automatically have a sort of personalised programme assigned to them. This is what the site looks like, and when they click on My Learning, they get a drop-down menu, and the key bit is learning that I have to do, because that is the mandatory piece. And the other piece around this was managing the recertification. So this is the certification part of Totara, absolutely critical to them. This made everybody's life, not just the administrators, but everybody's life so much easier, because they're able to manage all the sort of renewal dates for all the courses, when does the certification window reopen, progress people have made through it, when the certification is due, there's automatic reminders that go out to people. So, this is the part that actually really made a difference for them. People now know that they'll get the automatic reminders about when they need to do their courses, and they can see the dates and so on. And then finally, in terms of work streams, they had they wanted to have some really useful MI and reports. This is a snapshot of their reporting dashboard. A key one there is the CQC compliance summary. That means that CQC can see in real time the compliance rates for any part of the business, region, hospital, department or individual. So it really takes their data down to a granular level. What they found as well as these reports have really helped their line managers and learning coordinators support sort of personal interaction and dialogue with people, so they can use it as part of their performance management process. And it's just massively reduced the amount of time that they've had to devote to sort of their old manual tracking and processes. So now they've got simple online real-time reporting. They can run reports at any time they want. They can schedule them. They've got automated reporting, and it's all extremely transparent and accurate. And most importantly, it means that they're compliant in terms of CQC. So overall, the sort of results and benefits of this journey that they've gone through is, first of all, the cohesion with the business and clinical strategy. They've been able to meet the CQC standards. As an example, I've put up there, one of the hospitals moved from 36% compliancy to 85% compliant, which is a fantastic shift in a very short time. They've got efficient and accurate reporting, which is clearly critical to their auditing purposes. Staff no longer undertake role inappropriate training. They actually calculated that this was saving around £800,000 a year for them in terms of saving the amount of time that people were doing training that just wasn't relevant to them anymore. And of course that frees people up to be able to focus on their core frontline activities, which is around patient care. By making sure that the training was personalised and role specific, that's really supported the whole kind of cultural change around mandatory training, because people no longer feel that they're wasting their time doing courses that aren't relevant to them. And just as an indication of how busy the site is, they do have 2,000 users on the system every single day, so it's quite an active site. I mentioned before that having senior support cascading down through the organisation has been crucial. They've really got the buy-in now of the senior leadership team, and every single one of them is 100% compliant. So there's no situation now where you've got a sort of executive director expecting his team to be compliant when he or she isn't compliant themselves. And I think that what's been really nice about this is that we entered this into a CIPD People Management Award with BMI, and it was shortlisted in the category of best use of technology. So a nice kind of accolade of what they've achieved. So I mentioned before that the high-level support has been absolutely critical as part of the culture change. And here's a sort of snapshot of a few of the comments that some of the regional directors have said about the system. I think there's been a real change in their own mindset about how important it is to actually support the system. And finally, I just brought a slide together in terms of lessons learned. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think if there was somebody from BMI here, my client, what she would be saying is the key lesson that she learned or they learned was don't underestimate the time that it takes to shift people's mindsets in terms of that culture change. She always says, actually, there's the system bit. That was really easy, sorting out the data and cleansing it and organising who needs to do what in terms of the training. Yes, it was time consuming and it could be quite complicated at times, but that was actually quite easy compared to actually making that cultural change and really making people understand why it's important for them to learn. So, as I said, that's an ongoing piece of work for them, and as it should be with any LMS implementation. So, I think that's it for me, and I'm going to pass over to Lewis now to talk about his case study, which I think is quite different to mine.
That's great, fantastic. Thank you so much, Jo. Just whilst we're getting Lewis's setup, just want to say a big thank you to you. Really interesting to see those personalised learner journeys and the impact it's had on their compliance. It's such a big change for them, isn't it? I think she would agree.
Yeah, I'm sure she would.
I think we might have lost Jo there.
Okay, so let me just see if you can see my screen now. So if I can just get confirmation. And yeah, so can you guys see that? Okay, well, thanks, Jo. That was really good and a tough act to follow, I have to say. Very interesting. Mine's going to be a bit shorter. I have to say it's going to be a little bit lighter as well. I'm going to be talking about a project that we worked on and developed and delivered a few months ago. It's called MindEd. It's a very interesting project, and it's very different to BMI. So I'm going to be just sort of talking you through, mainly focusing on the design approach, which was a user-centered design approach that we used for the project. So that's kind of be the focus of the session, or my part of the session, really. So MindEd is the project, the website, or the learning site, is a consortium of health and counselling and psychological organisations that was led by the RCPCH, which is the Royal College of Paediatrics and Children's Health. And the whole project was funded by the Department of Health. Without going into a lot of detail, there's been a recognition that mental health has been very underfunded for the last few years. And actually early identification and investment at an early stage can save a fortune later down the line. So that's really where this project came from. And what it is a free and open access learning resource, providing advice and guidance really on children and young people's mental health. It's aimed at adults who work with children and young people, mainly in a professional capacity. So it would be teachers, community workers, faith group leaders, it could be scout leaders and such like, or volunteers. So it's anybody that really interacts with young people. And as I said, really the idea behind the platform is to provide learning content about children's mental health. So what that looks like on the site is a whole bunch of bite-sized e-learning, really to help identify mental health issues in young people, enabling the user, the adults who works with a youngster, to act swiftly and to help kind of early intervention and help improve the outcome of that youngster. And really also to understand what they should be concerned about versus what they needn't be concerned about. One other thing I'll just mention there is that there's something like 12 million young people in the UK, and it's been proven that something like 10% of those youngsters will experience mental health issues during their young years. So that's a lot of people. That's 1.2 million people directly affected with mental health issues. And then of course there's a lot of people around them, so their friends, family, people that work with them and such like. So moving on. So the need for a learning platform was identified by the MindEd consortium, and they put it out to tender, and Kineo was successful in submitting a tender for that, and our Totara-based solution. And I'll kind of explain a little bit more about why Totara was the right solution during the session, but ultimately for us that was the starting point, working with the guys at MindEd to come up with a solution, present it, and then we were chosen for it. So the approach to the project was to work very, very closely with the MindEd team, which was quite a large extended team, to really get under the skin of the end users and to map out some key user journeys. So I mentioned earlier the target users, the faith leaders, the teachers, the nurses, so forth. Well, we had to kind of map out how those different users would use the site, and kind of understand what their needs were from the site and what their journey through the site would be. So we undertook a collaborative user-centered design process involving workshops with different stakeholders, with our clients and with end users, looking at the content, mapping the content to the platform, and really kind of going through a requirements gathering exercise with all the key stakeholders of the site. And really our ultimate aim was to create the optimum user journeys, the optimum MindEd journey for the different types of users that would be using it. And in order to do that, we did a couple of things. We developed personas, and then having developed the personas, we developed user journeys. And I should quickly explain, for anyone who's not familiar with that terminology, a persona is an archetypal user. So it's kind of a stand-in user that represents the needs of a larger group of users. So what we do is we kind of define a character, if you like, and we give them a name and we give them a set of characteristics. And we also give them a set of motivations and expectations that drive their online behavior and drive kind of how they're using the site. So they're purely fictitious, but they represent real users, and they allow us to kind of validate our designs by taking the persona and say, well, how would it feel for this persona? How would it feel for Emily or for Jack? You know, what does this screen mean to them? Where would they click? And kind of just really, really walk through that whole user journey based on the use of those personas. And user journeys are what they say. We at an early stage identify some prototyping. So we create some paper prototypes of what that journey would be like, and then we map it to the personas in order to validate, or hopefully validate, the designs we come up with. Just click through now. So here's an example of a persona, one of the personas that was used for the project actually, and it's a chap called Phil, who's a sports coach, and there's a whole load of characteristics that we can see on the screen now. Hopefully you can see on the screen now. So Phil is 35, he's a professional sports coach, used to be a professional, he lives and breathes sport. He wants to see that can-do attitude from kids. He gets frustrated with kids that aren't motivated and such like. So we really build up this clear kind of picture, and oftentimes we'll even give a photo to a persona as well to really super bring them to life. So on the left there we can see kind of some characteristics of Phil, and on the right we see how they might use the site. So there's a bit of a technical term there. This is a real persona, so it relates to how he would use a particular section of the content, section 5 of the content. But there's some more broader sort of thoughts there as well, that Phil would typically search by using keywords. And Phil wouldn't want to log into the site. He'd want to be able to access the content without going through a registration process. He's really, really short of time, so he'd just kind of want to get in and dive into that content. So these kind of thought processes actually drove some of the ways that we designed the overall site, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Not least the fact that the site is open without registration. There are benefits of registering, but actually anybody can access any of the content without going through that registration process. So over the next, oh yeah, sorry.
Quick question, just before you go. We've had the very aptly named Tug14 hashtag. They're wondering how much of the content has actually been defined by this point when you're building the persona. Do you have an idea of how much content you've got?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. So the starting point for us getting involved in the project was that the content areas had already been decided, and the consortium is made up of different organisations within the sort of mental health spectrum. So it's the British Association of Counselling Professionals, the GPs, the College of GPs, College of Nurses. So each kind of stakeholder had their own kind of content needs, as in they knew the content that they needed to deliver through this platform. So the content had been defined, but it hadn't been written at this stage. But we knew broadly what content was going to be on the site and what users that content was intended for. So that kind of formed part of our development of the persona, saying who are our users and what kind of content do they need to access, and what is their journey from loading up Google, running a search, right through to accessing the site and getting through to the content. Does that sort of more or less answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Tug, does that answer your question? Yes.
Cool. Well, that's good to know. So the next couple of slides I'm going to show you are, again, these are the real prototypes from the project that I've just kind of pasted into this slide deck. So here we have a kind of lo-fi wireframe prototype of the site, where we've identified some different routes into the different content, and then we map Phil's journey through that. So here we have the homepage of the site, where you can choose to register, or you can dive straight into the content. And on the left-hand side there, we've got a block which really talks about why a lot of people would come to the site, as in they're having an issue with a youngster, and they're coming to this site to figure out what's going on with that youngster. So one of the prominent links is, well, I'm concerned about a child or a young person. So I can kind of explore the content based on the presentation of the issue that I'm seeing. i.e., I'm seeing a child that is not communicating, or I'm seeing a youngster that appears to be depressed. So that would be the way that I actually navigate the content. And that's what the next kind of slide goes on to, that we've actually grouped the content by behaviours. So anxiety, eating disorders, and so forth. So Phil can kind of look through that and go, yeah, actually that's kind of why I've come to the site, because this kid is clearly anxious. I want to find out more about that anxiety and whether it's something I should be worrying about and kind of, escalating or raising a bit of a flag about. Again, one of the other areas and one of the benefits of going through this prototyping phase is that you really kind of ask some fundamental questions very early on before you've touched any development. And you can go out and test these prototypes with end users, and it's very, very low cost. And it's the right time to kind of define what the requirements are before you've spent a lot of money developing the set of functionality. So we go out, and it was identified during this process that the users need to know what they're going to get. So as they find the right piece of content, they want to get an idea of how long it's going to take to do it, and a summary of kind of what they'll get out of it. So that's kind of what this screen is showing you, that each learning module, or session as we call it for this project, gives an overview of what the learning is, and what the learner will get from it in terms of learning outcomes and such like. Each learning module also has a feedback link, a feedback activity, so we can kind of capture what the end users think of the content, so that we can go through an ongoing kind of iterative improvement process. So happy days, Phil clicks on the e-learning link, and that launches a window, and then he accesses the learning. One thing I should point out is that we didn't develop the learning for this project. We developed the learning platform, but we worked with another organisation, the e-learning for healthcare, and an ex kind of government funded organisation who were fantastic, and they produced a whole lot of content, something like 200 sessions that were then integrated into the platform. So one of the things I touched on earlier, and I'll kind of pick up the pace because I know I'm probably taking a little bit long on this, but one of the key kind of requirements that came out of our early investigations that we needed to provide easy access to learners, to users, to end users, with no requirement to register. We didn't want there to be any barriers. We wanted it to be really, really easy for somebody to find a site and to access content without having to do anything else. That could be because the particular subject matter is sensitive, as in they don't want to be associated, the user doesn't want to be associated with looking at that content, or it could be just because they're short of time for a variety of reasons. So really the two principles we had was you can go in with no registration in order to access the content, happy days, or you can register and then you get more of a personalized learner experience. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the idea being that you get a program of learning associated with your assigned to you if you actually register. But as I say, we'll see that a little bit more in a minute. So in terms of the easy access, I've kind of talked about this slide a little bit already actually in what I was just saying, which is that users need quick access to get into the content and identify common problems experienced by youngsters. And in order to do that, we had a sign of problems page. That's kind of what I was just talking about a minute ago, a set of custom HTML pages where we can group content based on signs of problems in order to make it really, really easy for the user to access that content. I should point out that we didn't use categories, total categories for that, because they're being used for a different purpose. Given a different sort of design approach, we could have used categories for that, but as I say, we wanted to use them for a different purpose on this particular project. So I'm just going to walk you through a user journey, the not logged in user journey, and this is based on screen grabs from the current live sites. So we can see that it's actually pretty similar to the wireframe we saw earlier. Obviously, it looks a lot better because it's a full HTML site rather than a wireframe. But on the left-hand side there, we've got that same content area, which is signs of problems. And we can just, as a non-logged-in user, as somebody that's just Googled the site and arrived here, I can go straight in and click signs of problems. And then I'm presented with different categories of signs of problems, whether it's feelings or whether it's unusual kind of thoughts that are cropping up in the youngster, or if they're behaving in a way that worries us, or if there are kind of relationship issues we want to kind of explore a little bit more. But essentially, you've got these groupings of the content, and then within that, you've got the different areas, the different particular topics. So sad, bored, or isolated, bunking off school, whatever it is. And then the learner can choose one of those, click into it, and then they get an overview of what that session is about. Well, here's sad, bored, or isolated. The subject is aimed at everybody, and it's recognizing the difference between clinical depression and kind of everyday emotional experiences, which we all have, and particularly youngsters, of course. And then the learner can go in and they can access that content and hopefully get what they need out of it, which is what it's all about. So the other aspect of the use of the site is actually to register. And if you register, you get an enhanced experience. And basically, we're using programs and audiences, Totara programs and audiences to do that. And the way that we do that is we capture the user's job role or their role in terms of dealing with that youngster as part of that registration process. By doing that, we can put them in an audience, and by putting them in an audience, we can serve up programs of learning that are most relevant to that particular learner. So this really super leveraged Totara's functionality. I'm a massive fan of audiences in Totara. I think that a lot of people don't really realize the power of them. So it's something I tend to bang on a little bit about whenever I'm talking about Totara, is the power of audiences, particularly with some of the recent features like audience visibility, the ability to hide or show learning depending on which audience you belong to, as well, of course, as the ability to assign programs of learning to people based on which audience they belong to. So apart from that, we also use learning plans. And again, that means so if you've accessed any content or happy days, it goes into your learning plan, quick and easy to access it later. And of course, it records where you got to the last time you were accessing it. That's one of the big benefits of registration, as in it tracks your learning. We also create a custom course format, and you saw that a moment ago with the screen grab. It was to keep it really simple and minimalist, and that kind of goes back to our user-centered design approach of simplicity. We don't want any unnecessary distractions on the site. We want to make it really, really quick and easy for the user. And so we went for a very simplistic course format. That has the score module, it has a feedback activity, and it has the certificate. That's one other thing I should mention. One of the benefits of registering is you can actually get a certificate for completing some learning. So there's this sort of professional development dimension to this as well. And I'm sure that's something that will increase over time. I'm going to quickly take you through the logged in user journey. So here we have the registration form. You can see which user group you belong to, and it's basically, am I a police officer, am I a psychologist, am I a nurse, and such like. And that will define which audience I belong to, and therefore which program of learning I get associated with. So here we see the logged in screen. We can still see the signs of problems block on the left, but now we can see a new block on the right, which is the recommended for me. This is my personalized learning journey. And I've been assigned the foundation learning path basically because of the user group that I belong to. So I click into that, and it tells me a little bit about it, what that foundation learning path is all about. And then it lists out the curriculum, really, the curriculum of learning that's been associated to me. And I can click through it and then, mark my progress, go into any sessions that I feel are relevant. And of course, it's going to take a little while. Even though these are only 20-minute modules, it would take quite a while to get through that whole kind of foundation learning. So I'm going to try and show you a video now. So this may or may not work. I hope you're going to get the sound. So bear with me just while I try this. And you can let me know, or someone can let me know if you get the sound. You getting sound?
No.
No? Oh, that's a shame. Well, this was a little video that was done in order... Okay, so let me just mute to promote MindEd just as about the time it was going live. The chap you saw a minute ago there is Dr. Kelvin, Dr. Raf Kelvin, who was a clinical lead on the project and really the inspiration behind the project as well. Very inspirational man, actually. So that was a little bit, it was just a video all about it, and you can access it online on YouTube if you'd like to. So in wrapping up, I'm just going to try and go to the next slide now, if I can. A little bit about why they selected us. We had a great relationship with MindEd. This is a quote from Keith Chambers, a program manager at MindEd. We were chosen because we clearly understood what the project was all about. I have to say we did a lot of work up front in getting under the skin of the project. It's a great project, so there were natural, human motivations for wanting to work on it, as well as it being an interesting project in terms of Totara and technically. So they chose us because we worked hard at it and we went on to become great partners, and that's kind of what that quote said. The site was officially launched in March of this year at an event in London that was hosted by Norman Lamb, the Minister for Care and Support. It's been incredibly well received, but there's an ongoing evaluation study that's taking place where we can really continue that test and learn philosophy and carry on evolving the site, tweaking the content, tweaking the functionality to make it better and better over time. So that's me. That's a summary of the MindEd project.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Lewis. We've just been having a bit of chat here in the chat forum, I guess, if you want to call it that. And we're just quite interested if you could elaborate a little bit more on the audience side of Totara. And some of us here are Moodle still, and so just kind of understanding a little bit more of the capacity and capability of something like the audience function.
Absolutely, yes. So what effectively audiences are in Totara? Their ability to create a group of users based on system rules. So audiences can be static or dynamic, as in they can be static so that when you set them up, that audience group never changes. It's always the same people in it. But by far the more interesting usage of audiences is the dynamic audiences, where you define a set of rules and anybody that meets those rules is a member of that audience. So a rule could be any of the profile fields, any of the standard profile fields, or any of the custom profile fields, or it could be based on your activity of the learning platform. So to put that into context, say we've got a custom field which is, are you a first aider or are you a fire warden? Well, we can create an audience of users which is just the fire wardens or just the first aiders because it's in their custom profile field. And because they're in that audience, we can start serving up content to them. So we can give them a program of learning which is specific to the fact that they have that particular characteristic to their profile. or we can do it based on a rule which is you belong to this audience if you've completed this piece of learning. So we can almost kind of stack up different audiences based on their maturity on the system. So based on having completed this learning or that learning, you belong to a special group of almost like super users, really, who then get access to different sets of content. To give you a real world example, which probably is far more useful actually, take an induction program. We can create a group of users which is based on start date. So we can say, if you started with the company in the last 3 months, you are one of this inductee group audience members. Because you're a member of that audience, we will serve up to you the induction program. Because we use program functionality that we've got in Totara, we will specify a time by which you need to complete that learning. And we can create a number of learning sets. So a new starter pack as your first set of learning courses for the learner, and then a follow-on one, and so forth. But we can track it and manage it automatically through the system. And that's, it's kind of one of those things which the more you think about it, the more powerful you realize it is. Apart from the kind of pushing content to users, you can also use audiences for reporting. So I can start reporting based on just those people in Southeast England that live in Brighton that have the name Lewis, for example. I can create a special audience just that fits that criteria. So they're super powerful.
Great, thank you so much for answering. We actually have a question from Maha for Joe. She's wondering how many people BMI actually had working on the preparation of the site.
Yeah, thanks for that question. A really, really great question, actually, because given the amount of work that was carried out, you would probably think there was quite a big team of people. But in fact, there were only 2 people involved in all of the, setting up the matrix and the personalization questionnaire. It was a huge amount of work for them to get through. Obviously, there was also the learning coordinator, 13 of those in total across the UK, but actually administrating the site wasn't part of it was just part of their day job. It wasn't the only thing they did. They did a huge amount of other things as well. To be honest, we probably would recommend that more people are involved with a site of that size with that number of users. At times our client does struggle with the amount of kind of administration traffic that she needs to deal with. But yeah, it was quite an achievement for them, I think.
Okay, and she's just following on from that, she's wondering how much lead time did it actually have with just 2
Yeah,
people?
well, actually, it's another really great follow-on question, I think, because I think by their own admission, they probably, if you ask them now with hindsight, that they just didn't give themselves enough lead time. I think when they first engaged us, they had a target of implementing the LMS within 3 months, but actually they needed to spend a lot of time in just doing all that kind of data sort of management and organising the training matrix and so on, and that did take them a lot longer. So it was a little while, a lot of sort of preparation work for them. And I think it probably took them about another sort of 3 months on top of that before they were kind of really ready to sort of get going with things. Although it's probably worth mentioning as well that there were stages of this system. So there were things that they were able to roll out initially, like the training matrix and the learning on the system, and things like the more customised reports came at a later date. So it wasn't that everything was implemented in one go. There's definitely been phases to the project as it's evolved over time.
Great, thanks for that, Joe. And actually one for both Lewis and Joe, and then we'll probably just start wrapping things up. Sam Cole has a really great question, which is who actually manages the content within both of these sites?
For MindEd, there's a team at the RCPCH who are responsible for kind of curating the site. There's a whole program of producing new e-learning modules and adding them to the site, and that's ongoing, and there's currently a phase happening. There's going to be a very interesting sort of future phase of the project to make the site fully responsive as well, so all this content being accessible whether you're on a smartphone, tablet or desktop.
In terms of BMI, they just have one single person now who's managing the content of the site. Probably a bit too much work for one person, to be honest. but she's doing a great job of keeping it going at the moment. Yeah, hopefully she'll get some more support in the future.
Fantastic, great. Well, thank you so much for Lewis and Joe for showcasing those two fantastic case studies. I think everyone here will agree that they kind of showcase exactly how you can leverage an LMS, particularly something powerful like Totara, and really maximize it and optimize it for your solution and what your organization actually needs. You can really just pick and choose what works for you and customize it how you need to, which is absolutely fantastic. So we're going to wrap up there. I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who attended and joined us today. Just a reminder that we do have our final segment of our Totara User Group webinar next Wednesday at 3 p.m. British Summer Time. We'll be joined by Andy Kirk from Totara LMS. He will be showcasing new aspects of Totara 2.7, which is due for release around about November time, as well as showcasing some newer aspects of Totara, such as Totara Social. That's been hotly anticipated, so I certainly hope you can join us. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.